of message to say that we are recording. And so I'm going to, first of all, read about this event today. The event today is called Everybody, Impacted Body, Spectatorship, Carnival and Abramović. And it's an online...
Sorry, yeah, Carnivalesque.
Carnivalesque. Okay, so I was reading from the Eventbrite. Johnny should have checked the Eventbrite. No, the Carnivalesque. Carnivalesque, absolutely. And so this is an online event, and it's today's speakers are Dr. John Keefe and Dr. Richard Cuming. And and let me just read a little bit about this event. Everybody, Impacted Body, Spectatorship, Carnivalesque and Abramović explores key questions in how performative and participatory strategies may provide new insights into the experience of spectatorship and the body. The event is centered around two projects, each focusing on the role of creative practice as a vehicle for research in this area of exploration. And in particular, in this seminar, John Keefe and Richard Cuming will examine the visceral impact and exchange between the performed body and the spectator's body in two recent events curated by Marina Abramović in London. The first was the Marina Abramović Institute Takeover, October 2023. Then the second one was the Royal Academy retrospective, which was run between September 2023 and January 2024. Drawing on auto-ethnographic approaches, Keefe and Cuming approach the events as spectators and as participants, as Augusto Boal's definition of spect-actors. Our bodies impacted by the artist's bodies impacted by the spectators. The impact is mediated by the Carnivalesque, in essence, the takeover of the Queen Elizabeth Hall when it came to Marina Abramović project at that space, as an entire space becomes a carnival in itself, problematizing the notion of performance. All these ideas, of course, we'll be discussing and interrogating through this session. Just a few biographical notes. Dr. John Keefe is a senior lecturer in the School of Art, Architecture and Design at London Metropolitan University. His research centers on dramaturgies of physical theatres, of spectatorships, of ethics and theatres, of the new and recycling of the embodied mind. His latest publication is Qualified Empathy, the Spectator Looking, Not Looking Away, and that was in 2024. Dr. Richard Cuming was formerly at the University of Winchester, now an independent scholar. His research focuses particularly on the synthesis or the practices of the clown with contemporary performance. He has published on the work of Jacques the Coq, on clown training with acrobat Johnny Hutch, on Beckett's film. In these endeavors, he adopts a clown's eye view. All right, so I'm so delighted to have this this event today, and what I'm also really thrilled about is that you see what I probably would refer to as a sort of performance lecture in the way that the text will be delivered today, and just for our audience to get a sense of the structure of this evening, to begin with, we're going to simply hear the provocations, the paper prepared by John and Richard, after which we're going to be really great to hear some questions also from you, the audience, and to essentially start a discussion about this. I'm also having the job of changing slides. I'm going to ask John and Richard to please prompt me on that, and I may have at the same time to also welcome people in as they come. So hopefully I'll manage. Normally I manage to get all these things reasonably coordinated. Okay, so I'm going to first of all share the PowerPoint. And there we are. Sorry, there we go. And here we
are. We ready?
And here we are. That's perfect. All right. So let's begin.
Okay. So this is a dialogue exploring certain spectatorial and performative impacts on the body. Although Abramović is in the title, it is not about her work as such, hence no images. Rather, we share our viewing and experience of this impact at particular events through the lens of the carnivalesque and the personal, through the spectator's body.
Can you take the slide down, please? Thank you.
Provocations.
Great.
Everybody is observed and observing, as John Berger reminds and challenges us. Seeing comes before words. Child looks and recognizes before it can speak. To distinguish between necessary looking as an everyday social action and gazing or forms of objectifying looking. How is any observation perceived as one or the other? How can the intention be discerned by the observed and by what evidence? When we turn toward the field and aura of theatres, such a question falls away as we enter that defined space with the precise intention of a particular kind of looking. We become the knowing spectator, who is always active, more or less engaged from moment to moment. We become not an actor as such, but a former participant, in Boal's terms, a spect-actor. With respect to Abramović, there is a visceral yet distant exchange between the performing and spectating body, the impacted body on of both. You, subject-object. We are subject-object to each other. We exist in the paradox of each being a self-aware individual living with and amongst other such individuals. Thus, I reference my I-self as both subject-body, Lieb, and object-body, corpor, recognizing the other in their I-self being. Hence, our predispositions and socially enculturated mutuality towards empathy and sympathy, or not. The opposite of the Good Samaritan is the obverse of empathy, and altruism is qualified empathy. That is moral disengagement. We simply place empathy beside factors such as difference, preference, prejudice that equally inform our relations. Embodied mirror mechanisms and embodied simulation are neural processes that lie behind both degrees of empathy and aesthetic experiences, and that allows me feel ideas and think feelings. As Gallet suggests, empathy is the result of a direct experience of another person's state, action, emotion, sensation, thanks to a mechanism of embodied simulation. Such embodied mirror mechanisms allow an embodied approach to intersubjectivity and intercorporeality. This allows us to anticipate rather than to simply react to others' observed actions. Thus, we might consider that our social brain embodied mind also shapes our responses as spectators. This is the everybody of shared common traits that manifest and impact individually, that inform our responses as spectators, or of course, spect-actors. The spectator. We are knowing spectators caught in a paradox of distance necessary for a knowing suspension of disbelief. This rests not only on our recognizing the fiction as the make-believe it is, but also the conceptual blending whereby we accept the double presence of the actor or performer and the character or persona as subject and object. The same mechanisms shape and colour our responses to events, both in the real world and those we knowingly look at as if real. Frisson. Such spectatorial empathy is placed beside our welcoming and enjoying of a spectatorial frisson. To divert to my own impacted body, my own body. I have impaired vision in one eye. This demands laser and injection procedures and a daily management regime of eye drops to maintain the eye pressure stability. I know what the procedures will be, yet still experience those autonomic and vagal systems raising my body to a diluted alert state. We are attuned to fear to a greater or lesser degree. My empirical body is impacted both in the everyday and at moments beyond the everyday. This is the experience of the everyday everybody. The theatre allows, though, that empirical experience to become a safe fear that echoes my everyday fear. No injections, but simply frisson. The safe distance between what we are shown and the vicarious thrill of enjoying what would otherwise be dangerous and avoided. As we discuss, Abramović's theatre embodies such frisson, distance, qualified empathy within a distorted carnivalesque framing. But it is also about endurance and vulnerability. Marina Abramović, or A Matter of Distance. We look at the impact on the spectator's body, drawing on our own experiences of her work from the MAI Takeover, Queen Elizabeth Hall, 2023, and the Royal Academy Retrospective, 2023. Perhaps a sort of fragmented case study in discerned responses to her work and intentions, rather than any analysis or critique as such. Placing the spectator as observer and observed, we look at each other as much as we look at the work on the stages. Thus, with respect to imponderabilia, a reaction, not because of the nakedness, we felt uncomfortable taking up their space. A reaction, the funniest thing is watching people pretend to be nonchalant about it, although it's something they do every day.
John, can I just say more about imponderabilia?
Please do.
Yeah, imponderabilia, where you had to squeeze between two naked people in a very tight doorway space. And the naked duo between we had to squeeze on our visit were a male and a female. The naked performers who for the performance worked in shifts were young and beautiful and faced each other. Participants had to remove shoes, coats and jackets. I did this. Well, you did this, didn't you, John? And a dilemma presented itself to me. The space between them was too small to simply walk through, facing each other, probably that distance apart. It was a matter of actually squeezing through, and there was no chance of avoiding bodily contact. So whom do you face? Do you look towards the female? Do you look towards the male? This was a 4-second journey, and it required, for me, an element of courage. Nevertheless, I found it quite playful, clown-like. I chose to face the male, but avoided eye contact. Luckily, I was taller than him, and I'm not tall. I could look over his head. I stared at a point over his head. It revealed and played with my own ambiguous position. I was both bold and yet uncertain. I was betwixt and I was between. I was very conscious of my attempt to clench my buttocks together in an attempt to avoid brushing against the female behind me. How absurd I am. The performance was, like much of Marina Abramović's work, not intended to be comic. It was, as were the other pieces we were participants in, extremely serious in its intent. The humour arose, as John has pointed out, from the spectator's subjective reactions to the seriousness of the art. I was implicated in this too, as I was nodding. I was stroking my chin. I was there. Yes, I was there.
So we were both, of course, spect-actors for all the other people at the event. Such responses almost echo our own sense of engagement distance at Takeover, a set of simultaneous performances around and between which the spectators promenade. Although the body is at the centre of all the pieces, the body of the spectator was dramaturgically almost kept as a disengaging distance, invited simply to watch. Our role was limited. We moved within a state of distance, of qualified empathy, with minimal impact on our own body, So to take two pieces that were anti-carnivalesque, Glorious Past and Nobody, two still present figures made themselves vulnerable, standing for our own vulnerability as they trusted us with their vulnerability. We felt the impact in such recognition. Perhaps the body impact here is an uneasy mix of safe vulnerability, visceral looking and trust. Perhaps these are a diluted echo, albeit less extreme, of Abramović's Rhythm O from 1974. Vulnerability becomes an invitation to spectators, us, to act in ways we can only question, as feeding her grapes becomes a cutting of her hair, clothes and skin. Looking at the instruments, an echo from an earlier period of judicial torture, looking at what was done with these by people such as you and I when given a silent invitation. Slide 2. Slide 2. Richard.
Yes, there is pleasure in this grotesque image, which is taken from Bakhtin, Rabelais and His World, which is a key text of Bakhtin on the carnivalesque.
So, why would a spectator take the opportunity to inflict pain for their own and other onlookers' pleasure? This suggests a darker aspect of visceral, another aspect of othering, of objectifying, of anti-empathy, of the grotesque. The vulnerability here is that of the artist, not the spectator, unlike the essence of the carnivalesque, where the spect-actors place themselves at degrees of risk. Slide down, please. No slide.
Thank you.
Next section. Besides, as suggested, in all theatres there are prefigurings, pre-echoes and echoes, forms of heteroglossia. Perhaps these pieces are not carnivalesque, they are almost anti-carnival in the emphasis on order rather than disorder.
So please bring up...
Sorry.
Take a moment to read this. This is Shakespeare's clown, Will Kemp, or one of them. Anyway, there was also another clown called Robert Armin. He got annoyed with William Shakespeare and left. Some of you may know this. And after that, he jigged from Norwich to London in 9 days, his 9 days wonder. Performing, but watching, but performing, but watching. Imagine his impacted body.
So, is order placed beside disorder? Is carnival placed beside anti-carnival, as these play on and with each other? The spectator is within the lived experience, who looks and is looked at, watches and is watched, the everybody of the audience in a shared experience as the spectators, us, who are present. Take the slide down, please. This is the spectorial placement of the paragon or beside of theatre. Notes towards conclusions, maybe. To return to our questions, the foremost of which is why. Why these forms of performance? What are the intentions? Why these acts of endurance? We perhaps best leave the performers to answer this. Maybe we can frame or set aside these acts beside other and earlier such aesthetic prefiguring of the abused body, the pinned and pecked body of Prometheus, the hung body of Wodan Odin, the images of the crucifixion, the more or less mimetically realistic enactments of the crucifixion in film, theatre and Easter ceremonies. Richard.
Oh yes, sorry. Oh yes. In the Marina's Institute in the Takeover in the Queen Elizabeth Hall, there was a performance entitled Noise Body. One female student was standing on a very small stage wearing a magnetized suit. Her performance consisted in her assistants throwing metal objects at her as she stood there. These ranged or started from small objects such as nails, washers, screws, and gradually built up till they were large pieces of metal. I think there was even a dustbin lid thrown. Building up in force. The performer herself attempted to be absolutely impassive, not defending herself, so that by the end of this short piece, she was knocked backwards, staggering and nearly collapsing. This was coupled by now with the deafening sound of metal hitting metal. Those spectators who were sat were arranged in a fairly standard semicircle around the stage, although we were standing sort of peering in. Did I imagine heavy metal music was playing? I can't remember, or I probably imagined it. But here her body was really impacted, staggering back, and in the process became a grotesque metal mask, enveloping her entire body. The final body was not literally, but metaphorically inside out. Whilst I was physically distant, nevertheless, I felt an affinity and an empathy with this body inside a body, conjuring up for me conflicting yet conjoined images of extreme incarceration, of threat, for example, RoboCop, and of course, a sort of grotesque knight in armour. Distance, I was with this body, conscious of my own soft, impacted body and of their body. I was fascinated, horrified, and impressed. Yet afterwards, when I took a pause, I was, if not laughing, I was sort of chuckling wryly to myself, partly with relief, see Freud, 1976, partly at the absurdity of the body becoming a machine, see Bergson, and partly at Wyndham Lewis's proposition that we laugh because we humans are all things or physical bodies behaving as persons. Let's be frank, I didn't think that at the time. I was a bit too taken aback to do that. And I've put the laughter theory in after this event. John.
So, based on experience that Richard has outlined, and of course I would echo what he said, we asked a question: why does the spectator look? We suggest some answers. Visceral, safe thrills, a visceral moment, a desire to gaze in a permitted form, i.e. the theatre, simply an interest in the work and form of the performances. But in the lens of the carnivalesque, we see a release of our dark side, here as a kind of simulation made on our behalf as the every body. Slide 4, please.
Thank you. Are these key aspects of Carnival seen in the works we are considering? This brings us to dialogism, a key linguistic term in Bakhtin's writing, in which he considers language with utterance as utterance with others. Thus, language and speech between us is dialogical. It is multi-voiced, full of tensions and layered with both explicit and implicit meaning. They are dynamic. In introducing Bakhtin, her book, Sue Weiss notes where high and low registers of language dialogue each other in the historical context of folk humour, we can detect the presence of the carnivalesque. Please take the slide down, thanks. Approaches. Norman Denzing proposes other modes of performance of delivery as a performance text itself, as a layered my story. So I sit here to analyse my feelings of attending these two events. My approach is that of the storytelling self as an auto-ethnographer. And as a former professional clown, I adopt a clown's eye view of her work, one who scratches their head at the serious intentions behind her and her students' work. As Bakhtin writes in Rabelais and His World, his big book, civil and social ceremonies and rituals took on comic aspect as clowns and fools, constant participants in these festivals, mimic serious rituals. What Bakhtin doesn't mention are online research forums with learned speakers. I'd like to think he might have. Please bring up slide 5, thanks. This slide is a slide of Peter Bruegel Alder's 1559 painting, The Fight Between the Carnival and Lent. So on one side we have Carnival, on the other we have Lent. In the centre of this, although walking slightly diagonally up to the left, is a fool leading two old people away. So you can see the fool with the two old people walking up slightly towards Carnival. The fool turning their backs on the whole damn thing. And in the foreground, right down in the foreground, is the carnivalesque knight with his spear on his barrel of beer, challenging the figure of Lent, who's attacking the knight with a fish. Can you take slide down 5 down, please? Thanks. However, I brought along my carnival lance, my tickling stick.
Stop it, you're scaring us. Get on with it.
Okay, John, just a bit of fun, you know. My tickling stick, Ken Dodd. Oh, sorry. Oh, all right. I'll be serious. Analysis. You brought up the question, John, as to whether Abramović's work is carnivalesque. Does it turn the world upside down? Does it fit with the previous slides? Is there mimicry of serious rituals? In my view, both events we attended, aspects of carnival are performed, albeit unwitting. Firstly, in what Bakhtin terms the grotesque body. Secondly, there is the specific sense of place and its local distinctiveness, very important in carnival. Thirdly, unusual combinations of high and low performance, high and low art. I have to say that there have been many critiques of Bakhtin's views on carnival, including a particular issue I have with his term grotesque body, and in the performance of Abramović and her students. A vital question which needs addressing for me is the importance of what Bakhtin terms carnival laughter, in which there is general laughter directed at both high and low categories. In carnival, everyone is laughing. All degrees of socialness are stripped away, in which there is general laughter. Discussing Renaissance laughter, Bakhtin declares that laughter has a deep philosophical meaning. It is one of the essential forms of the truth concerning the world as a whole, concerning history and man, the human, the person. He asserts that Through Carnival, the world is seen anew, no less and perhaps more profoundly than when seen from the serious standpoint. Carnival is revolutionary through language, but is such laughter embraced in Abramović? Juxtapositions. Bakhtin hardly refers to the grotesque body, although he devotes a chapter to the grotesque image of the body and its sources in his book Rabelais and His World, writing about concepts of the grotesque and applying these to images of the body, comparing depiction of the classical, well-proportioned, beautiful body to the body to which, I would suggest, currently many people, at least in part, aspire to and admire. These depictions are contrasted with the body, with its flab, its leaks, its distortions, and its imbalances. Yes, when you get older, eh? Whilst the grotesque carnivalesque body is celebrated, there are, I find, difficulties with this binary, his separation. His imagery is of a body in which the classical and the grotesque may not exist together. And also, his body, for him, the body is generalized. Some non-grotesque juxtapositions provoke responses here. Aside, in 2005, a giant sculpture of pregnant disabled artist Alison Napper was erected on the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square. It was made from her actual body by artist Mark Quinn. It caused huge controversy. A naked woman who was pregnant and disabled on the plinth. But it stayed there for 2 years until 2007. Did we notice at the time the strange juxtaposition with the statue on a huge column in the same square, a disabled man? Two different impacted bodies, one a proud figure of celebration, the other a lone figure of commemoration. But then it makes me think about another juxtaposition with my impacted body. A couple of accidents. Age 4, I broke my arm when I was a passenger on a ship coming back from Australia. I can feel the fall, the crunch, the break, even now, many years later. I can feel my arm the memory is embodied. 3 years ago, I collapsed and had what I thought at the time was a heart attack. Luckily for me, it turned out to be pericarditis. If you don't know what that is, it is excess fluid round my heart. I spent 5 days in hospital with absolutely excellent care and concern from all the staff. Mind you, I wasn't keen on hospital coffee. Although the subsequent tests assure me that all is well, there is a very faint hum of feeling still around my heart. I can't not feel it. Writing this, the hum becomes louder. Talking about this, I can feel the hum. I feel breathless. Embodiment is subject to time, connected to my impacted body. Anyway, what about space and place? It's interesting because in her 2-page foreword in Colette Conroy's short book, long essay, Theatre and the Body, Marina Abramović poses 25 related questions about theatre. One question she asks is, what about time? But perplexingly, she does not ask about space. I, however, redress this by turning to consider an Abramović event in which we participated in terms of space and place. In Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, Bakhtin refers to Carnival as local in its sense of a great city, but localised, London. The performative in and of space is vital to Carnival. Can we bring up slide 6? Thank you. This is my photograph taken in January of Queen Elizabeth Hall, where the takeover took place. The South Bank in London contains many cultural institutions, including the Royal Festival Hall, the National Theatre, the BFI, Tate Modern, the Hayward Gallery, and the replica further down on backside of the Globe Theatre, as well as many restaurants, bars, and second-hand bookstores, as many of us probably know. On the level below the Queen Elizabeth Hall, there is a dark and dank graffitied skateboard park. On the roof there is an on the left as we look at it is an outdoor bar, and there are some small vegetable allotments green amongst the concrete. I draw on Foucault's 1967 lecture of other spaces, in which he considers utopia, that is, imaginative places that do not exist, and heterotopia. The heterotopia is capable of juxtaposing in a single real place several spaces, several sites that are in themselves incompatible. He actually maintains that theatre is a heterotopia, the theatre building. I propose that the Queen Elizabeth Hall is a heterotopia that is both open and closed. It is open to the large outside area of the South Bank, yet the Institute event was ticketed and so closed to the wider space. Please take the slide down, thanks. Within the Queen Elizabeth Hall itself, there are a number of incompatible yet connected and connective spaces, some of which are formal performance spaces, a large theatre space and a smaller space. There are others, corridors, there are public gathering spaces, the foyer, dressing rooms and storage spaces. That is a heterotopia of found spaces. Many of these spaces were used by the Institute performers, some evidently very carefully chosen. For example, a group of 4 performed backstage of the theatre space in water in a heat wave, almost a beautiful dance piece, which was highly appropriate for their performance, as it beautifully played with and challenged concepts of dominance and cultural hegemonies in theatre spaces. Other spaces were seemingly randomly chosen. One was called a quay, where a male performer had built a narrow glassed-in installation as a living space in the open foyer, which he tunneled through, breaking down the wall between the walls. It neither fitted within nor challenged the usual use of a theatre foyer, in which a temporary community is gathered in a heterotopic liminal space before a performance. The foyer connects the theatre spaces to the outside world. I myself felt it would have been better to have placed his performance outside the entrance to the Queen Elizabeth Hall, creating a real connection between the open space of the South Bank outside and the sealed space of Institute event within. Nearly there. In conclusion, inconclusive. To wrap up our experiences in a loose parcel, we were queuing outside the Queen Elizabeth Hall before the event and leaving after it on an autumn Saturday afternoon. It was quite warm. We were chatting, excited, mingling with the jostling and diverse clouds of pleasure seekers, drifters, drinkers, tourists, children, and food stalls. I can't actually remember if the fountain, which plays in the summer, was playing that day, soaking many of us, in which children laugh. It probably wasn't playing. I'd like to imagine it was, though. This, to my mind, was where the carnival took place and the carnivalesque could be detected. We were unwitting spect-actors, perhaps, and our impacted bodies were briefly shaped through a sense of play. Thank you. The end.
The end.
The end, indeed. Thank you very much, both. This is it's a very interesting provocation you've given us today, and lots of food for thought. I'm sure there'll be also a couple of points where perhaps people want some may have a few questions perhaps as well. We absolutely welcome that as well to get us started on this. And one thing that I didn't share at the start of this session is that when you went to see the Marina Abramović takeover at Queen Elizabeth Hall, I also was there, and I remember we saw each other, and we just randomly we happened to be both there in the same day. This particular takeover had happened, I think it took place over a few different days, so it was quite yeah, we were just sort of luckily there at the same time. And it was, I don't know whether people in the audience might have seen this, but it was a very memorable event. And just to give it a little bit more context, whereas in a season of events themed around Marina Abramović's work, including her retrospective at the Royal Academy a few months later, what had happened before at the Queen Elizabeth Hall is that the Marina Abramović Institute, so effectively her students and the people that work with her, were curated as part of the program by Marina Abramović in this all through in a sort of site responsive approach to the Queen Elizabeth Hall. And indeed, it sort of generated a lot of different, I'm sure, different reactions. So to go to that central point, Richard and John. So effectively, we've got these theories backed in. Of course, one of the key theories to do with this notion of spectatorship performance in relation to the carnivalesque, and his argument, of course, is the idea that in the carnival, in the historic idea of the carnival, what you have is this blurred position between performer and spectator, and of course your argument is, how does that relate to an experience such as that of Marina Abramović and her takeover? So what are your thoughts in that respect? So if we were to summarize now some of these key points that you raised, so I say that also mindful of the fact that when it comes to Marina Abramović, there's a strange idea often in her work of to what extent you are participating in it. So essentially, many of the works, particularly more in recent years, the audience has been invited to take part. But at the same time, you have that same feeling of that famous piece Imponderabilia, where of course you have the same kind of slight discomfort in taking part. So you are in this very ambivalent situation. You're both invited to take part, but also invited to feel often uncomfortable in taking part. So if we kind of break all this down in terms of the carnivalesque and in terms of spectatorship, what are your thoughts in terms of summarizing this sort of paradox?
Well, what you just said, Jacek, is interesting. As I tried to raise, we feel uncomfortable taking part, I think literally just said. But actually, people did take part.
Yeah.
People did cut her. They did slice into her. They did point a gun.
Now you're referencing now you're referencing Rhythmo. Yeah, so in the 1970s.
So, Ponderabilia, we are discomforted, as Richard very fantastically outlined, and we walked through it on our 4-second journey. But there was no sense of threat.
Yeah.
There was no threat to the performers, who were students who went to had a kind of rota when they would stand there. There were security guards standing close by, Yeah. So it was a very, very qualified sense of discomfort, I would say, and therefore dramatically opposite to Rhythm O, where Abramović subjects her own body and allows her body to be subjected to whatever the audience decided to do.
Sure.
And that's why your question of discomfort, I think, is really interesting, because what drives spectators, of course, are also spect-actors, because they're watching other people do the cutting and the feeding of the grapes, etc. in Rhythm O. What drives people to suddenly feel released from those normal inhibitions to do something to this body that's presenting itself as available for things to be done to it.
And just to clarify, sorry, Richard, just to clarify for the audience, Annelies, I'm coming to you definitely, so we'll come back to you there for sure. Just to clarify for the audience, so we're referencing two pieces here. So one is Rhythm O, famous piece that Marina Abramović did in the 1970s. That wasn't, crucially, it wasn't recreated for the Marina Abramović Institute takeover. So that was just a historic piece of the 1970s in which effectively, many of you will know this, Marina Abramović was performing in a space in which different items, different objects were displayed next to her body, and the audience was effectively invited to act on the presence of these objects in relation to her body. What was quite disturbing is that this led, when she first did this piece, to very shocking interventions by the audience, including abusive and violent interventions that the audience did. Instead, we're also referencing another 1970s piece called Imponderabilia, which is the one described by Richard and John, where you have the two naked performers facing each other, effectively blocking the door. So you have to go past them, and in doing so, you're in this very, very close proximity. One, of course, and this was recreated for the Marina Abramović takeover in 2023, with, of course, very different implications there.
Can I just?
Sorry, the Imponderabilia was recreated in the retrospective.
In the retrospective, sorry,
that's right. They had students taking the male and female parts.
Yeah,
but they had a false doorway. Sorry, Richard, just finished. They had literally like a frame representing a door, so you could actually choose to either walk between the two figures or to walk around them. Yeah. So as observers, the spectators, the spect-actors for each other, we could make that choice. Richard, sorry.
I was going to say there was no coercion. You didn't have to do it, and in a way, perhaps what I didn't say for myself, it was like being dared. I enjoyed the kind of dare of
definitely.
You're back to being a child again. They also did at the retrospective. They did have the items from Rhythm O
yes,
on a table, although they omitted the gun, but you had to you couldn't touch any of them. It was
sure
like a a table,
like a still life.
Still life, yeah.
And I suppose it's worth considering that for instance of course the ethics have changed, our sense of morality has changed since the 1970s, of course, and I don't believe that believe that the first time the Imponderabilia was presented, you didn't have the choice of, you had to go past the performers, and of course now Rhythm O, particularly through its controversy, of course, it gets documented rather than represented. I'm going to get to the questions thank you very much for those that have added some questions. So we've got a question first of all from Annelies, and then one from Emily, and let's start from Annelies. Are you happy to talk, or if you want, I can read the questions. Just let me know.
I can talk if you. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Of course, I mean, we know that this has been recycled over the decades, both of those, and Marina Abramović has explicitly spoken about how offended she was that people went so far abusing her body, actually, in a rhythm. Oh, yes. But my question goes to the fact that we speak about the spectatorship. Do you think that this is a phenomenon that is strictly connected to the time being, as I mean, historical time being, not only time as space, but the way we do perceive things in certain, let's say, decades where we would think of ourselves as being more free than perhaps we are now, or how do you feel about it?
Well, I would think that such performances, Franco B, all those people from way back in my theatre history, one doesn't see that kind of thing these days. What I find frightening, actually, is that and this I think is what Abramović was trying to point out to us, that by reenacting in Rhythm O and allowing herself to be some kind of scapegoat, if you like, or some kind of victim, some kind of a body to be played with. I think what's happening actually is that we are now seeing that played out, of course, in real life. And incidents in contemporary life are almost as it's almost like Rhythm O has Rhythm O has almost become a parody of itself, because what was done to her body by us, the spectators, is now being done by people in real life to fellow citizens. So I'm not quite sure where the question takes us, analysts. I don't think we could ever do Rhythm O again. I don't think it could ever be restaged, if that's what you're asking. I'm not sure why we would want to restage it, given that we are seeing those kind of actions happening around us.
Depending on how you sort of understand it as artwork, yes, because there is the reality moment, of course, which goes far beyond what we would accept. That's not my point, of course. My point is that how do we as spectators perceive the art piece today? Would we simply stay away from this kind of expositions?
Yeah, can I just say that there are at Battersea Art Centre, and I can't remember the name, and it was actual theatre performance at Battersea, which was extremely pushing the boundaries. Although we remained spectators. Sorry, the name escapes me. But the spectators were distanced in space and observed, and obviously there is always participation in some way as observers, even if it's very minimal. And I'm also thinking of, do you know Unterrund Good? I don't know if I'm pronouncing them correctly. The Audience. Do you know that performance? Which actually
no, sorry, I don't. No.
Right. Well, I think they're Dutch, or are they? They're Belgian, and you know, it's very much kind of, you are sitting there, and then some audience member that you're being filmed as you go in, and they will pick on people, and they will break boundaries about what is expected of being an audience. So this is happening now, where they go beyond, as it were, this participation, and more to where we, the theatre company, are kind of attacking you, and it became very uncomfortable. But I think there's some, you know, there was also a sense when I was there that this was quite pleasurable. and it was there was also that sense of, oh, I'm glad it's not me they're picking on, and yet there's something kind of pleasurable about it. So it is that betwixt and betweenness for me.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Thank you very much, both of you.
Sorry, Annalise, I'm sorry to interrupt. If there's Sylvia has just written something in the chat.
Yeah.
Talking about.
Oh, hold on. Before let me moderate, John. I'll just come back to Sylvia in a second, but we got Emily first. And can I just say I mean, a really important point there is, of course, what is the impact of these pieces if we were to reperform them, but also generally the idea of pieces that push certain boundaries in terms of our relationship, particularly with the body. This is an interesting one, John. You hinted before the fact that, of course, things happen nowadays. Things are done. The things that were done at the time of Marina Abramović's first iteration of Rhythm O, where now happen in our daily lives. Of course, we hear terrible events of violence and unfortunately constantly. Whether they weren't taking place before, obviously that would be debatable, but I see your point there. Let me just, what we'll do is that we'll later on we'll come back to Sylvia's point about the reperformance of Rhythm O in 2005. But just before, if we can go to Emily. Emily, so I'm just going to read this. Feel free to jump in if you want. So Emily says, an interesting topic. Thank you. I wondered whether you see the spect-actor, so as more of a collaborator, participant, or creator. So let me just to put this for our audience, just in case. That spectators as the phrase that of course was made was sort of coined by Augusto Boal with this idea of this notion of performer slash spectator, that of course is very relevant to this discussion. So what would you say, John and Richard, in relation to this question, and perhaps not only what does the original definition, how did Boal approach the definition, but also whether you think that nowadays we can revisit this idea through these principles of collaboration, participation, co-creation.
Well, I kind of basically I've stolen the term. I mean, all respect to Boal, but I've stolen the term or borrowed the term, and I always make very clear in my writing. And I take it as in a Brechtian sense, in that any and every spectator is participating in some way. Even if you're sitting in the fourth row of the grand circle, you are still participating. But that's a whole other discussion. So I borrowed a term to really confront the notion of the spectator being passive. No such thing. No such thing as a passive spectator. Spectators are always active because our body is always active. The embodied mind and embodied simulation means that our body is always active. So to answer Emily's question, I would very simply, I would say it's all three. I think the spectator is a kind of collaborator, is a kind of participant, is a kind of creator, and it would depend on degree, it would depend on the occasion, it would depend on the circumstances, perhaps the space, the heterotopias that Richard outlined. Yeah, so that's my answer to the question. But it opens up, thank you, fascinating other.
Sure.
I mean, Boal used the term in a very specific context.
Absolutely. That's why
with what does he recur? He uses is it the Joker? No, I can't remember what it is. It's gone. Who sort of is a master or mistress of ceremonies, who conducts the way that we're going to effect change, and therefore they are I think, in Boal's term, a collaborator, participant, and a creator. I agree.
Some kind of adjective.
I mean, yeah, I think. Do you know Rancière, the emancipated spectator?
Mm-hmm.
It's a long essay, isn't it, about what we need to do is you move beyond this idea of distance between actor, as he sees it in a very political sense, in which we sit passively. But as John, you said, we're not passive in any case.
And it's interesting that, you know, in recent scholarship about particularly participatory art, so a lot of more recently, the last I would say 1 or 2 decades, there's been an emphasis shift when it comes to participation on also the ethics of participation from the point of view of the artist, because so often we talk about, I mean, for instance, Rhythm O asks the ethics of participation from the point of view of the participant. So the participant is put in this situation. Of course, they are responsible. I mean, and it's shocking that of course participants at the time did respond in that in these extreme ways. The shift in perspective in participatory art beyond performance specific sort of disciplines has been on really thinking, what is our, you know, if I ask people to take part in something, what am I in a position of power? And presumably I always am, because if I'm the artist, if I'm on stage and I call somebody, I always have some sort of position of power. And therefore, what ethical questions should I ask? You know, how am I effectively exploiting the presence of an audience for the sake of the piece that I want to create? What happens to what people bring in relation to my piece? So all these things are obviously these further questions of the ethical questions of participation, and of course there's a whole debate there. And for instance, Claire Bishop famously in her writings on participation, she talks about the fact that we also risk problematizing so much participation that it almost becomes it becomes prohibitive, that we always you know, kind of you know, there's a potential of questioning so much what we do that we inhibit you know, artistic you know, expression in that sense. So I don't want to over reduce what Claire Bishop talks about, but these are really, really interesting questions. And John,
sorry,
go for it.
Just to say, and there's somebody else waiting to ask a question. We need to.
Yes, there's quite a few. Yeah, definitely.
But very quickly, however fine the line, Jacek, there is always, and you kind of just hinted at it, there is always the distinction, however fine, between, quotes, the artist, quotes, the spectator or spectator, because ultimately I've gone along, I may have paid money, I may have paid £15 for my ticket, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately I am a member of the audience, be it a spectator. There is the person who has created the show, is running the show, however you want to define it, however you want to present it, that fine line is always there.
Yes, yes.
Can I just say, well, it's just a thought really, which is about custom and practice in pantomime, in panto, where invariably a song sheet is brought down and children are invited to come and join in the song sheet and join in the song, and they have to do certain actions and so on and so forth. So, you know, there don't appear to be any ethics around this, but then the children volunteer. They can, you know, so when they ask for children, nearly half the audience want to run onto the stage and have to be held back because they love, but they already know what's going to occur.
Precisely.
Which
it's precisely, so the knowingness becomes,
the ethics create themselves, because nobody's going to do anything to those children on stage. Nothing more is going to be done than playing with the song sheet, etc. In other words, there's a kind of, there is an accepted ethical parameters. That sounds very grand, but there are accepted ethical, which we all know because it's pantomime. Rhythmo broke those ethical boundaries, but let's give over to Mayor Dave.
Brilliant. Let's get into, actually, we just mentioned that Sylvia wants to tell us. So we got 2 questions. So one from Sylvia, one from Medat, and so we'll definitely come to. It'll be great that there's debate. Sylvia, do you want me to read this that you put in the chat, or are you happy to talk about it?
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, Sylvia.
Good. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry for not putting the camera. I'm traveling in a couple of hours and things here is not good.
No worries.
It's not a question at all. It's just something that I happen to know, so I added it to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, and do you want me to read it?
No, I mean, people can read it. It's fine. It's nothing important.
I always just because not everybody might access the chat, you see, so I'm just always conscious of that. So I'm just going to read, if that's all right. So if I may, I would like to say something about the potential reperformance of Rhythmo in 2005. Did the 7-piece? See, Marina Abramović did the 7
This is Marina
easy
Abramović.
pieces. Yes, at the Guggenheim, and she wanted to reperform Rhythmo, but the legal department of the museum did not allow her. She reperformed The Lips of Thomas instead, another piece. She has repeated on many occasions that she gives permission for reperformance for all the works except those that are dangerous. Rhythmo is at the top of this list. She has said that she can take responsibility for herself and take risks, but cannot be responsible for anyone else. So, and what was your point, Sylvia? Can I ask you in terms of in relation to this? So about the ethics of reperformance, particularly when we know that a performance originally also led to obviously controversial outcomes. What was your opinion on this, Sylvia?
The reperformances at the Royal Academy were not of pieces that are dangerous. They were all pieces that were durational. I have to tell you that it was not my first time that I went through Imponderabilia, and it's always amazing. But what really stayed with me was House with Ocean View. I watched the final day with Amanda Coogan, and it was so different from what we know that Abramović did herself in New York, and it was so brilliant. And Abramović herself was there to take her down from the installation. I think that it's this and Luminosity, which is unbelievably difficult. Those were the highlights for me.
Thank you so much.
It was surprised.
Yeah. Thank you, Sylvia. Then this is a really important point, because I think the reperformance is, of course, brings another dimension to this debate, in both an artistic one and an ethical one, in relation to how these pieces get reperformed, but also in relation to how our ethics, and even just literally down to the policies of a particular venue, what gets to be reperformed. And as you say, the Rhythmo wasn't re-included, was documented but not reperformed at the Royal Academy. That's a really, really good, interesting point. Thank you very much. Medad, you got a question or a point?
Yes, no, I just wanted to thank you very much for your presentations first. I was interested because in some sense all these performances seem to me, also I've only seen them on YouTube or on video. Unfortunately, I haven't had the privilege of having been there. I wish I had. But nevertheless, they have been performed in venues and institutions that are very much Eurocentric. This is not necessarily a criticism. It's just kind of pointing out that the critique that it kind of it provokes and the dialogue that it establishes is primarily with Western participants, right?
Sure.
And that's fine, yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it kind of raises the question: is that if we wanted to extend these projects into other sort of and I don't want to say cultural arenas, because I don't want to define, I don't want to categorize cultures in terms of separate entities, but open them up first of all beyond European or Eurocentric institutions, and secondly to audiences that are not necessarily familiar, with that the theatrical culture or the kind of performance art culture that where it comes from. How do you think that could affect or redefine the notion of participation? And I say that just add one more point for clarification, because in that sense, it's not as simple as we place it, for example, in a venue where audiences go to and they know more or less what sort of things to expect. They're part of the canon, of a certain canon of presentations, right? It would involve a different kind of dialogue with participants. So I don't know, I was just wondering if you want.
Thank you very much, Madam. That's a brilliant question.
It's a fantastic
Richard,
question.
Richard, you wanted to respond?
Well, actually, my response is I think that's a really excellent question. That's kind of knocking me sideways as to how this might be even done, I suppose. In what way is it possible? Because, I mean, the two events that we attended, that there's a knowing, what I would, I suppose, term a knowing audience, both culturally, but who already understand or know what is happening, and have got some knowledge, so I think they already have knowledge, because I'm thinking, it's like the happenings of the 1960s, for example, where people know what they're doing, even though it's new for its time. So that's my only comment. I have to think about that and think, where might this occur, if you like.
And I think that I mean it's a very, very important point, absolutely, Richard and Meredith. It's a very important point, because so often we assume that participation is often presented in sort of with a sort of implication of democratic values, and it's you are completely right to raise the point, because of course there is also reality of particular parts of the sort of sections of the audience, typically the ones that will be regular goers to galleries in central London, as an example, in New York, etc. Obviously, we're talking inevitably, with obviously lots plenty of exceptions, but we are talking also of a privileged section of an audience that has the time, the money to spend in cultural activities like these ones. So there is definitely an implication of that is important to, something being participatory. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's inclusive in every way, and this may also be beyond the artist's individual control. It may also be generally an institution's issue of the audience they attract. They can they get so this is a really interesting point. And John, did you want to say something about that? Sorry, Rich.
Go on, Richard. Go
on. Only that John and I first gave this paper in Cologne at the International Federation of Theatre Research, in the embodied working group, and there was a keynote which was about Brazilian carnival, and I was extremely surprised in a way that it was much more regulated than I thought it was, and that people sat on, like it was a benches and stadia as the carnival processed, and I'd got a completely wrong view of it. But in a very different culture, it seemed, and people paid, and people could sit in the cheap seats and were not part of the carnival. And so I'm just saying that as something that was quite intriguing to me about what carnival, or the cultures of carnival, and of course what Bakhtin doesn't express is any other forms of carnival and the kind of historic carnival. So it doesn't talk about gay, why would he? He doesn't talk about gay pride, a very different form of carnival. I'm not sure that has any relevance to your point,
I think,
but it's about other cultures which are.
I think the word that's coming to me from both the original question, thank you, Medad, for that, and the responses, is one, I'm not quite sure what the links are. I'm a bit like Richard, this is kind of, you need to think about it, but two terms come to me. One is appropriation, and the way that we may appropriate material from other cultures. And the second is a kind of entitlement. So, as potential audience, we sometimes think we are entitled to see anything and everything. And of course, people will fly halfway around the world to go and see some kind of performance. Yeah, they have the time, they have the money, they have the means to do that. And that may be a one-way trip, because the people where they've gone to see a quotes performance, where they've gone to may not be able to kind of reciprocate and fly back to see something in London, for example. That's very confused, and I make no apology for that confusion. But it just seems to me that there are ethical considerations here around appropriation and entitlement. And how would Abramović's work be seen? The point being, of course, this isn't really about Abramović's work, it's about our responses. But I wonder how Abramović's work, or work of her kind by her students in the MAI, will be perceived, will be received by audiences in a very non-Western culture. Is there such a thing? Probably there is, but we are in such a globalized cultural world that we have bits of knowledge, or we think we have bits of knowledge. We have bits of stuff that has floated in from wherever around the world. And if you mention something, I perhaps might say, oh yeah, that's kind of whatever it might be, should be actually, my first response should be, no, I have to acknowledge my ignorance. So I think there's another term coming into this about the ignorance that we perhaps need to acknowledge in ourselves as spectators. And as Richard said, most of the time, as you said, most of the time, we know what we're going to see.
And what's interesting is I'm conscious of the we've got a couple of minutes left, and but I suppose one of the issues there is also the one of how does spectator. I wanted to essentially finish conclude this session thinking about what is the role, how is the role of spectatorship changing in relation to what's happening around the world, but also specifically with technology in terms of particularly social media. We are constantly being spectators, and to some extent we're also constantly being participants and active in our spectatorship. And yet, of course, there's lots of different points of view about that. We are, in a sense, if you think of the way, there's a wonderful a wonderful article called "The Distracted Spectator," and it talks about, and in a sense, there's a lot of studies more recently that have happened about this idea of how our attention span is more suited, is getting more suited to the time span of a TikTok video, as an example. So I think any thoughts on this point, John and Richard, to conclude. Where is the future of this? Where are we going? Not an easy question to answer.
Well, I can give you a kind of answer. Some time ago, I wrote a piece, and within that piece, I argued the distinction between spectators of an event and spectators at an event. And it seems to me that if I watch, for example, a performance of a play being done at the National Theatre, and it's being streamed to a cinema, and I go and watch it on the screen as it's being performed at the National, Royal Shakespeare, all the companies are doing that kind of thing. Yeah. My argument is I'm actually a spectator in the cinema. I'm watching a mediated version of that performance, and I am therefore a spectator of the event. Whereas if I'm sitting in the auditorium at the National Theatre, I am the spectator at the event. Like with sports football, I can be either at the ground watching the match, or I can be watching a match of the day later, or I can be watching a streamed version of the football match, whatever it might be. So that I think there's a profound distinction which needs to be much further explored between at and of. And that becomes particularly relevant in our mediated world, in our world of almost back to Mehrdad's question, where almost anything is accessible to us. Or we think it is, but actually everything is not accessible. It's a mediated access.
Sure. And of course, I mentioned social media, but of course, AI, artificial intelligence, is of course not only everything is accessible. Anything is effectively can be conceived through technology in that sense. And we're seeing again another notion of spectatorship as a result.
It's the of at distinction again. However fine, it's the same as I remain a spectator even though I'm participating in. However fine the distinction, I remain spectator or spectator. And I think that however fine of distinction is absolutely crucial.
I think of I think of games. I think of online gaming, where that you adopt a handle, or you adopt a character, and it's about finding your way through these games. I don't do it myself, and I don't really know anything about it, but I know people who are building and building and building up through these games, and they're in a completely, they see themselves as being in this other world. And I also had a friend who did Second Life, where you go into a world and you can live in that world.
Sure.
And it's more, or they see themselves immersed in that world completely, but it's also very distinct from their oh God, what can we say, real world. And so it is a performance that they live in, absolutely.
It completely blurs the at of distinction.
Yeah.
Still there formally, but that's an interesting example. Blurring.
Yeah.
And of course, with that, the idea, and I'm just thinking about the famous the Society of the Spectacle. Debord talks about this idea of a society that's that is based on the spectacular, not in for me, coming from theatre originally, so as my background, I find it often problematic how the word spectacle gets used in pejorative terms, but it's obviously a really interesting example of argument about the idea of how late capitalism brings the spectacular to make us passive spectators, but
passive consumers.
Passive consumers, that's right. And then, Nicholas Burioda was thinking that then Reed takes that argument and then talks about the society of extras. And in a sense, that's possibly what we have at the moment often, where in this, we take part constantly in things, in what we see, social media, etc., AI, etc. But in a sense, there is a risk that we feel like we are the protagonists, but actually we're just the extras, and I think there is an interesting element there. Not to say that being an extra is bad, but necessarily professionally, but you can see where that's going in relation to the metaphor,
Yep.
So on that note, we have to finish. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you so much, John. And I really want to thank also our audience, because these are brilliant questions, and I'd love to. I hope that these generate more debate. I know that obviously there's never enough time to answer everything, and but I do hope that it will generate more debate. I just wanted to remind everybody that there are more events of this kind, and so please join us again through Creature. If you simply Google Creature London Met, you will see you'll get straight to our research centre website, and what you see is, for instance, that on the 26th of this month, it's always on a Wednesday. Our online seminars are always on a Wednesday, and always from 5:30 to 7. The next one is on the 26th of November, and it's called Design and the Occult, and in conversation with Sally Ann Huxtable, a really interesting conversation about the ideas of the tradition of the occult when it comes to design, and Sally will bring a really interesting perspective on this. So as always, it's interdisciplinary. We love the debate, and I hope that you've enjoyed it too. So thank you very much again. I'm going to stop the recording now, and yes, thank you very much, and have a lovely evening.
It's time for dinner.
And I'm